Talk about here, right here.
Oh, right here.
Right here. What do we do?
You make a marker.
We make a marker. What do you do with the body? But sometimes you cremate it. Embalm it. What is that? What does embalming entail?
Preservatives.
Draining the blood and replacing it with
Preservatives?
formaldehyde.
Poison.
Okay, I'm going to talk about human cultures and how different cultures view the dead.
You know, a lady just invented a mushroom soup to bury you in?
Yeah, I
Did you see that?
I saw that.
That was pretty cool, I thought.
14,000 years. We have 14,000 years of culture here. They didn't do it all one way the whole 14,000 years. Our culture hasn't done it all one way 14,000 years. Our culture is so afraid of the dead that we either burn them so they can't come back to life, or we drain their blood and replace it with formaldehyde so they can't come back to life, and then we put them in a box. Is the box locked? You bet it is. I worked for a mortuary. Those boxes are locked.
Is that to protect the contents inside from outsiders?
I'm just telling you the facts. You can decide for yourself why we do it this way. Then we take that box and we put it in the ground. How deep?
6 feet.
Hey, everybody knows 6 feet down. So if they come back to life and break out of that box, they can't dig through 6 feet of soil to get to us. Then
Well, don't they put the
There's
coffin in
more.
a cement box?
oh yeah, you put it in cement now. Yeah, that's to
Wood box
protect the
and
ground
cement
from all
box.
contaminants.
Yeah.
Then we put those people in the ground outside of town and put a fence all around them with a locked gate, just in case. Now the towns have grown up now around the cemeteries, but in the old days, the cemetery was not near town, it was away, and they were not going to come back and bother you. That's how afraid we are in our culture of the dead. It is a fear, and it's not expressed. You know, we don't consciously think of it, but you wouldn't do all that stuff to a body if you weren't deathly afraid of some spirit. Not all cultures believe that. A lot of cultures around the world want to keep their ancestors close to home, so they will bury the body for a while until the bones are, you know, all the flesh is gone, and they'll pick up the bones and hang them in a basket over the entrance to the house. Can't imagine that, can you? Or they'll bury Uncle Fred right under the house floor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Keep him close to home. You know, down in Mexico, they have El Dia de los Muertos, where they go out to the cemeteries and they party with the bones and all that kind of stuff.
It's totally different in the front yard.
Different cultures have different ideas about the dead and what happens when you die. Some believe that you're born, when you come into this world, you come in a fetal position. We did an excavation in Cambria on a village site. We hit 2 burials, and they were both in a fetal position, so tight in a fetal position that I knew they had been bound with cordage. Their knees were actually touching their foreheads, and they were facing the setting sun.
Yeah.
1,000-year-old burials, and that's the fact. The hypothesis is that whatever religion they had, they believed you come into this world in a fetal position, you're born into the next world. You better be in a fetal position and facing the setting sun, because that's where the next world is, right? You know, so there's all these different ideas. When you go through 14 years of college studying anthropology, you learn how to look at all cultures objectively, even your own culture. And it's hard to do. It's hard to step outside your own culture and look at it objectively and think, God, those guys are weird.
They're crazy.
They do some weird stuff. You know, they don't embalm bodies in Europe. They don't wash eggs in Europe. You know why? Eggs, when they come out of a chicken, have a protective coating on them, and if you wash the eggs, you remove that protective coating, which allows them to become infected. So, I mean, we have chickens at home, and you know, it comes out of a hole very close to the poop hole, and sometimes eggs get poop on them. Don't wash them, just crack them open and eat them. Poop doesn't get into the egg as long as you haven't washed it.
Oh.
See, I can really go way off track. I'm holding this plant because I wanted to tell you, over the 14,000 years that the native peoples have been in Lake County, they use probably 2,000 to 3,000 different plant species, plants and animals, and they 14,000 years worth of experience dealing with the weather patterns, dealing with the environment here, knowing what's edible, what isn't edible, what's medicine, what isn't medicine. You got a headache and you're out in the woods, what are you going to do? You don't have any aspirin with you. You're going to find a willow tree and chew on some willow tree bark because
Make
that's
some tea.
what aspirin is made from.
Or make some tea out of it,
Aspirin
out of the bark.
is just a chemical derivation of willow bark. This is just one of those plants, and this is actually this time of the year it's starting to get some beautiful little green shoots. But in the summertime, when the shoots have died, this is what you see sticking out of the ground. It's like the end of a horsetail. If you dig it up, underneath all of this horse fuzz is a white bulb. See that? Yeah. You can bake that and eat it, and it's got about the same nutritional value as a potato. Or you can take that bulb and grind it up and mix it with water, and it lathers up, and you can use it as soap to wash your hair, wash the poison oak off of you, whatever you want to do. You can take that ground up bulb and sprinkle it on a pool of still water, and it will stupefy the fish so that you can wade into the pond and grab them with your bare hands and they won't swim away from you. Cool, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Or you can take that fuzzy stuff and bind it together, and you got a beautiful whisk broom for cleaning out your house.
So what do we call this plant?
This is one plant, and how many uses have I told you for this one? Whisk broom, fish, eat it, wash the poison oak off of you. Yeah.
Potato? Headache? Oh, that's the.
no, that's the.
No,
That's willow.
that's willow.
That's just one plant. They use 2,000 to 3,000 species of plants and animals in this area. Why didn't they go to agriculture?
They didn't have to.
Didn't have to. You're not gonna, wherever in the world you see agriculture develop, those are places that had very, very bad resources to begin with. So it was no big deal for them to wipe out the diversity and switch to one crop or two crops. It was no big deal. Here, if you had a drought that did away with a third or half of the different plants that you were using, you still had 2/3 or the other half of the plants were still producing. If you're in one of those places and you have agriculture and you have a drought, you've wiped out your food source and you're dead. The other thing about agriculture is you don't see, around the world, you don't see warfare in areas that don't have agriculture. You only get warfare in places where agriculture developed. Because there's so much, you have so much time and energy invested in this crop, and these people over here, look at those guys, they got some good stuff over there, I'm just going to go get it, But when you're depending on the natural resources, there's no need for warfare because everyone has equal access to all the resources that are there. There's no haves and have-nots. Oh, goodness. Okay, so, what was I doing?
Plants?
What is that plant?
Oh, it's called soap root,
It is, okay.
and it's growing all over the place. It's growing right outside this building. If you
Yeah.
walk around, you'll see the little wavy leaves coming out of the ground.
It has really flowers.
You guys want to talk about history at all?
I used to live outside of Potter Valley, and there was something.
Yeah, history?
Some fruit too.
Okay, so the Native Americans were here
Same thing.
and still are here. And they came all the way up to the time the Europeans arrived. And on the back of this is my site area chart, which I use as a population chart. Now after they got really good at processing acorns, you see the chart makes a big population jump. And then it makes a big dive. That's when the last volcanic eruption occurred. Probably those cinder cones over in the Oaks. And it didn't kill people. Well, it probably killed a few, but not too many. But I think it scared enough people that they decided, let's move over to the Russian River. So they were already overcrowded in the Clear Lake Basin, overpopulated, and some of them were starting to go that way anyway. So, you know, a volcano goes off, and it was a big cinder cone, so it would have blasted stuff out in the air, big red, you know, molten cinders coming down on you. An umbrella is not going to protect you. And I'm not sure how far it spread. But we know it's all over the Elam Indian colony. We dig through an archaeological site down about this deep, and the whole ground is covered with these big, round, molten things. You can tell that they flew through the air molten because they're all twisted and stuff. Really neat stuff.
From St. Helena or Nocti or?
From the Oaks, those red rock quarries over in the Oaks, those are cinder cones. About 3,500 years old.
Okay.
Probably the most recent volcanic eruptions in Lake County.
Oh.
Yeah, and we're overdue. We're about 1,000 years overdue for the next one. Yeah, it'll be over in Long Valley. Long
I
Valley.
know people that live
I'm
over
glad I
there.
came here today.
They'll be staying over at my house.
You don't want to be down
Real
there.
estate on the side.
So then, and they were doing really good until some Spanish guy arrived in Central America and brought with him whooping cough, diphtheria, smallpox, measles, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
1500s, in the 1500s. Because these people had set territorial boundaries all through the Americas by this time, and you had to trade with your neighbors to get resources that you needed, those diseases spread like wildfire throughout North and South America. By the time the first Europeans actually got here to explore the Americas, at least a third of the native population was dead. Dead. And when you kill off a third of the population or half of the population, that takes a heavy toll on the political system, the religious system,
Food distribution.
food distribution system, absolutely, the whole thing. And the gene pool, yeah, it's a heavy toll. So by the time the first Europeans got here and started traveling through the area and writing diary notes about what they're seeing, you have to read those diaries with that in mind, that they were not seeing the culture at its apex. They were seeing the culture that had already been devastated by at least a third of the population dying from those diseases. And then the Europeans finished them off. Not quite, but almost.
Pretty close, they tried.
Pretty close. Yeah. I can talk about this building right here, which is kind of a neat building. This was built in the 1860s by a fellow by the name of James Jameson. It was built down there on the highway. And it was built, I don't know if he planned it this way or whether it was just accidental, but when he built this building, it just happened to be where 4 roads came together. There's an 1877 U.S. plat map showing the Eli stage stop, and this is the road from Lower Lake to Lakeport, and this is the road to Middletown and Calistoga, and this one goes out to the lake through this one you just drove on here. That was a stage road. Went down to the lake to Anderson's Ranch, not the Anderson Marsh Andersons, but a different Anderson's Ranch. And this road goes over to 175. So, yeah, Red Hills Road was one of the stagecoach roads. And then this map on the back side is the 1885 map. Doesn't really, it's not as accurate as the 1877 map. I'll pass this around. So, he was here, right here, where all these roads came together. And if you're running a team of horses with a wagon or a stagecoach, and you're coming up from Lower Lake, you know how steep that grade is?
Yeah.
When your horses get here, they're exhausted. So you're gonna wanna change horses here. So it became a horse changing station. Because he settled this whole valley here, and it was kind of a handy valley, handy because it was enclosed, you could easily corral your cattle in here, and handy because it was where the roads led south and over Mount St. Helena, people, ranchers from all over the Clear Lake Basin would herd their cattle here once a year, keep them in pens, and once a year they would do a big, huge cattle drive over St. Helena to Calistoga, which is where the railhead was. Back then, there was no road over St. Helena. It was called the Old Bull Trail, and the Lawley Toll Road wasn't built until 1868.
Right.
So the early 1860s is when the Jameson family was here. Horse changing station, cattle area where they were rounding up the cattle and driving them over the hill. That's what made this place an important historical site back in the 1860s. The Jamesons lived here for, I think, about 14 years, and then they sold it. I forget who they sold it to. They moved into Kelseyville, and James Jameson ran for supervisor and spent a couple of terms as county supervisor. He's buried in the cemetery in Kelseyville. The Elis came to California with a herd of cattle and horses and ended up buying property down by Willows. And it ended up owning about 2,000 or 3,000 acres down there. It had apple orchards and a big, I don't know if I got a picture of their ranch here or not, probably not. Big apple orchards and huge thing down there that he had. And his son, Benjamin Eli Jr., came up here and got a patent on some property here, actually bought the old Jameson ranch house and decided to go into the cattle business up here. His father really didn't want to come up here, so because he had such a nice place down there. And so he sent his daughter, Sarah, to come up here with her husband and run this place. She had married McClure, what was his first name? James McClure, who owned a ranch in Winters close to her dad's ranch. And so she and James came up here and ran this place as a stage stop, as a public house, and cattle ranch. And he was out taking care of the cattle all the time, so it was up to Sarah to run the stage stop. And it turns out, when you start looking into the background of Lake County stage stops, they were almost all run by women.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a little thing here called the Women of the Stage Stops. I don't know how many there are. I'm going to start here, and if you're in the back. No.
There might be some more back there on the table too.
Mine's on you.
So Sarah McClure ran this stage stop. She kept the horses fresh. She kept food on that, not that stove, but a stove like that. And this was a bona fide stage. A stage stopped here 6 days a week. Either going from Lower Lake to Lakeport, or Lakeport to Lower Lake, or Lower Lake to the geysers, or Lower Lake and Lakeport to the hot springs resorts, or from here down to Calistoga, Middletown to Calistoga. 6 days a week. A stage was either going this way or that way. So you may come here as a stagecoach rider. Maybe you're heading from Lower Lake to Middletown, but that stage goes on to Lakeport. So you may have to stay here overnight in one of the little bedrooms upstairs and wait for tomorrow's stage, which is the one that went from the Anderson Ranch down to Middletown and over to Calistoga. So that's kind of how it was here. Every day a stage would come and change horses here. Well, except one. Actually, I have the schedule. The Clear Lake and Calistoga stage line schedule from 1882. I'm going to start it here and pass it around. I think I got enough for the whole room. You could leave San Francisco at 8 o'clock in the morning and get to Middletown by about 1 o'clock,
No,
and
really?
Lakeport. Yeah, you take the boat from Hyde Street Pier across to the Napa River. You get on a stage get on the train actually in Napa, ride the train up to Calistoga, get on the stagecoach in Calistoga, come over the mountain to Middletown, get on the stage at Middletown, depending on whether you wanted to go to the hot springs resorts or Lower Lake. If you were a miner working at Sulphur Bank Mine, you'd take the stage to Lower Lake, get to Sulphur Bank Mine. Or you could go to Lower Lake and get on a boat and go to Lakeport, which is why it's called Lakeport, duh, because sometimes it was easier to get there by boat. So that's how this place is. That's what this place is about. Sarah McClure not only kept the horses fresh and the food on the table for people that were here, she also taught school to all the local rancher kids that were around this area and ran the post office. And for a while this was called the town of Eli. What did you get? Oh, that guy in the back, yeah, he's notorious.
Yeah, there's that guy down in the corner of that thing, Bent Nose.
Bent Nose Partner, yeah, he's a notorious stagecoach robber. Stagecoach robbing was so prevalent that the Calistoga paper, if a stage was held up, the paper would just say, "Stage held up again today in the normal place." I mean, it happened so often, it was not newsworthy. It was just like, "Stage held up again." And there were certain places on the road over St. Helena where the guys would hide out. They were poor, homeless people like we have all over Lake County now, and they would hold up a stage, and most of them knew the driver. You know, they would they would usually wear a flour sack over their head with some holes cut out, you know, and as the stage came up, they'd say, "Hey, Joe, how you doing?" "I'm doing fine. Who are you?" You know. Some of them were nasty, some of them were gentlemen, like Black Bart, Charles Bowles, the gentleman bandit, they called him. He would write poetry. While he was waiting for the stage to come around the bend, he'd write poetry and stick it on a tree, you know, and when the posse came along trying to figure out what was going on, they'd find these poems, and they're actually some of them published somewhere. But kind of a neat guy. He was a school teacher until he was 50, and then he went into the stagecoach robbing business, and he robbed. Right, yeah. Are you a school teacher? Yeah, see, you got, now you know what you're going to do.
You can relate, right?
I think he held up 28 stages before he was caught, and you want to know how he was caught? Yeah, well, he had a neckerchief, you know, he would wear a neckerchief, and he dropped it at one of his robberies, and it had a laundry tag in it. And they traced it to a laundromat, or a Chinese laundry, 2 doors down from the apartment in San Francisco where he was living. And that's how they got him. So he spent a few years in San Quentin. And when he got out,
it's in Chinese.
When he got out, he actually robbed a few more stages, including the Cloverdale, Lakeport to Cloverdale, or Lakeport to Ukiah stage, and one Upper Lake to Ukiah, I think. And we think he probably robbed a couple on St. Helena. There's some written accounts of a person that held up a stage, and the person swears it was Charles Bowles or Black Bart. And but you know, if you cried and whined that, you know, this purse was very valuable to you and this ring was your grandma's, he would let you keep it. All he was interested in was the strong box, the payroll basically that went to the mines. It was real easy for stagecoach robbers because they would hang out in Calistoga at the Wells Fargo office. And they would see these guys bringing a big heavy box out and put on the stage. Well, they knew right away, yeah, that's the payroll going up to the mines in Lake County. So they'd hop on their horses, get out ahead of it on the road over St. Helena and hide out and just wait for the stage to come by. Take the strong box and leave. The guy that ran one of the biggest mines here, the Great Western Mine, Roca, what was his first name? There's so much crap up here, you know, stuff gets sloshed around. Anyway, Roca was the foreman of the Great Western Mine, and he got so fed up with these guys stealing the payroll that he would ride his horse to Calistoga and pick it up himself and take back roads and stuff. A neat thing about Black Bart, a lot of people don't know, is he never rode a horse to a holdup. He always walked, because if you're on foot, you can get into the brush and the posse can't follow you on their horseback. So he made his getaways, and he was so good at what he did because you couldn't find him, you couldn't follow him. He would go through the brush. And in fact, I have these walking sticks here, which you can buy. Each one of them was used by Black Bart. Highwayman Black Bart makes a clean getaway on foot. See? Anyway. When he held up the stage over the Hopland Grade, he made his getaway by going to Lakeport, going across the lake to where Ciego's is now, and over to Bartlett Springs, and then he walked from Bartlett Springs to Colusa. That's how he got away.
Oh, that's
Amazing. You know, the guy was just incredible. But he was not the worst. The worst was Buck English, Lawrence Buchanan English. And the English family was a bad family. They picked a fight with a family when they lived in Cordelia down where the rivers flow into the bay down there, Cordelia. You know where Cordelia is?
Yeah.
Anyway, they started out down there when Buck English was just 12, 13 years old. His family got into a shootout with another family. It's kind of like the Hatfields and the Coys kind of a thing. And they shot and killed his brother and wounded another brother. And his dad made him swear at the age of 12 or 13 that he would avenge the death of his brother. And that's kind of how Buck English's life started. They moved up here to get away from that feud, and they moved into Anderson Springs. So he and his brother started out by rustling cattle, and they were stealing cows from the Great Western Mine. And Mr. Roca got word of it and set out a trap for him and ended up catching them and trying to teach them a lesson. Buck would come down into Middletown. He would like to hang out in Middletown and carouse, get drunk, and go out in the streets and shoot off his guns. I mean, this was real Wild West stuff going on here in Lake County. And he hated the Chinese. Whenever he needed money, he would just rob the nearest Chinese person of their mine payroll or whatever and beat them up usually. And that's what actually got him spotted the first time he got caught robbing a stagecoach, because he went out of his way to beat up the Chinese person that was at the on the stagecoach. But I think he robbed his first stagecoach in Lower Lake. He was 22 years old. He shot a guy in Middletown at the roller rink not long after that. He and his brother, it was getting really a lot of heat on them, so they took off and went up to Oregon to visit, spend some time with their mom. And then when he came back, he just started holding up the stagecoaches again. He held his last one, he held up coming over St. Helena, and he ended up riding through the brush to Oat Hill Mine, which was a big mercury mine going on over there at the time. And from the Oat Hill Mine, there was a stage road that went down to the Napa Valley. So he managed to get on a stage going that way. Well, one of the guys at the Oat Hill Mine recognized him and got word to the Napa sheriff saying, he's on the stage, he's heading your way. So they got a posse and met him, and there was a huge shootout. He had his own guns. The sheriff had shotguns, and they hit him a couple of times with buckshot in his arm. I mean, it was just nasty. he shot the sheriff a couple of times, and eventually, he basically told the stagecoach driver, just take off, get out, let's just go, you know, I mean, he was all shot up and everything. But they finally managed to corral him and hauled him in, and he spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in San Quentin. And he got out and died 2 years later. And he's buried in an unmarked grave in Colma.
Oh, it's good to be alive in Colma.
Good to be alive in Colma, yeah. There's a few alive, not too many. It's so cool looking at that town. It's like you're looking at a town in a distance, but it's not. It's up close, and they're all headstones and mausoleums. His dad, Lawrence Buchanan English Sr., has a really nice headstone in the Middletown Cemetery that his sons bought and put up for him when they were still alive before they got. I'm sure it was bought with, you know, stagecoach robbery money. Yeah.
Was this house built here? I thought you said something about it was originally over there.
It was originally over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was over there, and you probably, if you've been in Lake County for a while, you probably saw it, driving back and forth. Caltrans is gonna widen this whole stretch of highway here, and so they were gonna tear it down. And they decided that it was not historically significant. Okay, it's one of only 2 stage stops left in the county. It was the gathering place for all the cattle that had to go over to Calistoga. It was actually also a gathering place for a 320 group vigilante force in 1868 that went down and took a dam apart in Lower Lake. That a San Francisco company had built a dam on Cache Creek. Clear Lake flooded, farms were flooded, people died from diphtheria and malaria. It was a massive mess, and they went to the court to try to get, you know, compensation for this, and the court said, nah, there's nothing we can do. So people started riding around the lake saying, hey, let's take care of this ourselves. 320 people showed up here with their rifles and their blankets, and they sent a team of 8 people ahead of them down to Lower Lake. Lower Lake was the county seat at that time. They tied up the sheriff and, you know, all of the officials. They set 40 people around as guards, and the Upper Lake minister came and said a blessing, and they started to take the dam apart. The dam in the mill, it was a sawmill. It took them about 2.5 days to get it all demolished, and then they all packed up and went back home. And the corporation sued 150 individuals in Lake County for da-da-da-da-da-da. And when it got to the court said, no, the dam was a nuisance, they had the right to take it apart. Yeah, I'm telling you, the Wild West was right here, and this is where they met. But to Caltrans, this is not a significant building. So the community decided it was significant enough to preserve. Unfortunately, we had to move it from what it was. Now we are doing archaeological work down there, and we're discovering all the activities that took place in this building by doing the archaeology. A building is nice, and you look at it and, oh, look at this, a nice building. But this doesn't really tell you what went on here. In order to find out what went on in this building, you have to go in the ground around the building and find the stuff that tells you what took place in the building. The cartridge casings, the broken porcelain dolls, the marbles, the square nails, that kind of stuff. We've laid out a grid system out there covering the whole area. Every 5-foot square we excavate down to the 1800s ground surface. We screen all the soil in that 5-foot square. It all goes into a bag with that square's location. It comes here. We wet screen and wash all the soil off. We take all the artifacts upstairs and sort them into categories. It all gets sorted, cataloged, entered into a computer database. At the end of the project, we'll be able to create a map showing where the outbuildings were, you know, all that kind of stuff. We have.
How do you volunteer?
Yeah, how do we volunteer?
If you want to get involved,
Yes.
join the Lake County Historical Society. That way you're covered by our insurance. And anyone who's a member of the Lake County Historical Society can be involved. If you want, you can leave your email, your name and email address with me, and I'll put you on the list to notify once the weather clears and we start back up over there. And on the second Sunday, usually Cheyenne and I are staffing this museum the second Sunday of every month, except for next month. And while I'm staffing the museum, I'm usually upstairs, and anyone who wants to come and sort artifacts is welcome to. And I'll teach you how to do it. And as a special gift, Oprah is giving away today a square nail from down there for each of you.
That's nice.
This is a square nail from the original Eli house.
Handmade.
Yes.
And it's 2:24, so I've already talked a half hour too long.
That's
I know, yeah, you guys thought it was,
Who's got one?
oh, you only want one? Well, pass one on. Yeah. You don't need one, you live here. Well, there's a nice bent one. Yeah. Square nails were so valuable that they would actually burn down old buildings just to get the nails to use them.
Really?
You know why we don't use square nails today? Because the companies that made wire nails bought the steel mills and refused to sell steel to the companies that made square nails. Typical American monopoly. I can't tell you that these were actually hammered by James Jameson, or one of his kids, but it's very possible. So that's how you learn about how a building was used. But people get really excited about saving a building, but saving the building by itself does not tell you about its history. If you want to know what happened in the building, you have to do the archaeology on the ground around it. It's the garbage that people leave behind that allow us to reconstruct the past. And that's what I do. I spent 14 years in college learning how to study people's garbage.
Now, you know, in
An
Tahiti,
archaeologist said.
is the Captain Cook went there with
Yeah.
us. And the nails were really valuable.
Yeah.
And so when the women in Tahiti sold their bodies to the sailors would pay them in nails.
Yeah.
And then they would say, I nailed it.
And
It's the truth.
it's yeah, I believe it. Have you seen the shot glass thing? You know why we call them a shot? It's because back in the old days, a .45 caliber bullet was worth the same amount of money as a shot of whiskey. So if you didn't have money, you could go into a bar and put a bullet on the counter and get a shot of whiskey. So
Oh, really?
it's a shot of whiskey.
Oh, my darn. Oh, my God.
Is that cool or what? All right, thank you all for coming.